Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, my homeowner association neglected the neighborhood and flooded my property. I sued and destroyed them after they stole my dumpster. Here is what happened. Subscribe to Ripe on YouTube and hit the bell to turn on notifications. This is the story about how I will never, and I mean never, live in an HOA neighborhood again in my life. I will start off by explaining that I bought a foreclosed home for a pretty good price a few years after the market crashed in 2008. I thought it would be a good investment, but I was dead wrong. The issue with this foreclosed home is that I did not realize, and neither did the inspector, that there was some neglect lurking behind the walls. The HOA had owned this home for quite some time before I bought it, and it was sort of obvious that it had been ignored for a while, but I did not think too much of it. So, a few months into living there, everything seems normal and commonplace. Until one day, it simply wasn't. Anyways, it was a Friday, and I very inconveniently had left town that weekend for a wedding. When I got home that Sunday, I arrived to utter disaster. My neighbor met me outside. He is a nice guy and, believe it or not, saved my home from more damage when he had my water shut off. He noticed on Saturday sometime that there was water pooling out from under my garage door, so he called to have the water shut off. This unfortunately was after he had called the HOA, but they would not deal with it since it was the weekend and essentially not their problem, it seems. He said that he had asked for them to call me to inform me of what was happening, but they had refused. Total a-holes. The damages that were done to the home were pretty extreme. I had to have the floor and subfloor replaced on a majority of the main story, and not to mention the walls and baseboards that were ruined. All of my furniture was toast. I was barely able to salvage most of what I had on the main floor and the basement level below it. I'll admit, I had a small mental breakdown that day. Apparently, what had happened was that the water heater and some other pipes burst on the second story, which was really the main level because of the way that my tri-level home was built. When the insurance company came to inspect the damages, the plumber noticed that there was some patchwork done to the water heater and some of the surrounding pipes, but it had been cleverly covered up. He even mentioned that he was not surprised, not even the inspector, noticed it. He then asked how long I had lived there, and he said that he would assume it was done right before I bought the home. I was absolutely fuming at this point. The HOA had owned the house for years, and the insurance company's inspector and plumber both said that this was a patch that was performed recently, a crappy patch that was the exact reason why this disaster just happened. All in all, this flooding resulted in almost $100,000 worth of damages. Talk about a panic attack. When I attempted to discuss the findings with the HOA at one of their meetings, they refused to take any responsibility for my home's damages whatsoever and said that if we had a proper inspection performed that it would have been found. The board leader even insinuated that I had done the patchwork and that I was only trying to blame them so that they would pay for the damages. I told that girl that she could basically go F herself, and she had me removed from the meeting. Fast forward to the next week and I had several pieces of furniture and other items in the driveway. I was attempting to salvage some of my stuff and had it drying out in the sun. I had rented a temporary portable storage pod and rollaway mini dumpster as well. One day, while I was working on things and had construction going on at my house, that same woman walked up into my driveway seeing me working in my garage. She did not introduce herself or say anything friendly, but instead started asking right away about why I had all of this stuff sitting in my driveway. I told her that it was not her business, plus she already knew why all of this stuff was in my damn driveway. She said that I was going to have to move the storage pod and that I needed to contact the HOA that day to get permission for the rollaway dumpster. And by the way, Ripe stars, my apologies, it started raining really hard just now. Either way, apparently I was violating some rules or something. I politely said no and asked her to leave my property. Not even 24 hours later, there was the letter in the mail. I was literally waiting for it. Of course, it was her, the board leader, essentially repeating what she said to me in the driveway. Then there was a fine of $150 for not having permission for the dumpster or the storage unit. I threw that BS right in the trash. I received a letter and more fines nearly every day, but did not really care because they couldn't take me to court until I had not paid their fines for 6 months. I also stopped paying their monthly dues because they can pound sand as far as I care. I planned on moving anyway once I was finished with construction. This place had left a bad taste in my mouth and I didn't want anything to do with it. About a week or two went by and one morning I went outside to leave and realized that the rollaway dumpster had a bunch of trash and other clutter items inside of it. Like someone had just tossed their old shed of crap into the dumpster that I am paying for. I'll admit that I sort of expected this, but I was pretty annoyed because it took up a lot of the room that I needed for the construction trash. Unfortunately, there was not anything I could do because I was not sure whose trash it was. I let it go and went on with my day. A few more days passed and I came out of my house to find the dumpster completely gone this time. I was confused because I had not called for it to be removed and ended up reaching out to the company to see if they had picked it up by mistake. They told me no and said that I should drive around to see if someone in my neighborhood had taken it. I asked them if this was even a thing that could happen and they said that it happens more often than you would think, especially with the smaller ones like what I had. So I did as they suggested and sure as hell I found that mini rollaway dumpster sitting in one of my neighbor's driveways. I knocked on their door and a middle-aged man answered in his pajamas. When I asked him about the dumpster, he did not say much, but I could hear the voice of a familiar-sounding woman behind him. It was that damn board member woman. I looked past him and could see just barely that they had some kind of construction going on in their kitchen. It looked unfinished. I walked over to the dumpster and lifted the lid. The man protested as I walked away from him. Inside it was some of my old ruined furniture and then some cabinets from their kitchen on top. I took pictures of the dumpster in their driveway for evidence. Without saying anything else, I backed my truck up to the mini dumpster, hooked it up to my hitch and drove away with it. The woman had come out before I pulled off, yelling at me, and she even threw her cup of coffee at my car as I left. I was pissed at this point and decided, to hell with it, I'm gonna sue these a-holes now. So that is exactly what I did. I got myself the best lawyer I could find that was willing to deal with an HOA and sued the hell out of them. I proved with multiple different sources that they were responsible for the pipes and water heater bursting, ruining my home and furniture, and then I showed how they had stolen my rollaway dumpster as well. Thankfully, the court sided with me and awarded me a fair amount of money from the HOA in damages to my home. Then they even gave me extra for the board member stealing the dumpster, which I found quite amusing. The lady was pissed and yelled at me all the way out to my car until her husband dragged her away. I ended up fixing the place and selling it for quite a bit more than I had purchased it for. So it turned out to be a good investment after all, even though the HOA was a bunch of douchebags. So yeah guys, I guess if you are smart, you can still make money with a house that you bought in an HOA, provided that you find someone that would buy the house. Anyway, let's continue to the next story. This one is titled Revenge on a Scammer. First and foremost, this did not happen in the US. Some events might be pursuable up there, but down here it was mostly no man's land regarding the kind of scams I fell for. For the sake of this story, here in no man's land we used the top-level domain NML. My wife is a nurse. Back then, in the early 2000s, she worked in an ICU of a relatively exclusive and therefore expensive hospital. Specifically, she had to care for patients that had undergone cardiac surgery. At the same time, I was working for a small company that was going out of business. The owners were retiring, we had not secured any important contracts lately, and in my country you have to pay for employee severance unless you file for bankruptcy. So they decided to shut down where they still had enough cash to pay our severances. One day my wife calls me and tells me about this gentleman in his late 50s that had been on the verge of passing away, and after that close call he was so grateful and stuff. We will call him Benny Lowy. This gentleman happened to work in electronic imports, which gave him access to incredibly convenient deals. Long story short, he was so grateful he could sell us an LCD TV, a store demo unit that had been used just once, and we would need to pay like 1/4 of its retail price. as long as we kept it quiet because he was risking his relation with the brand. This caught me off guard. I said yes and she paid. Anyway, the only TV in the house had been a wedding present and weighed over 100 pounds. We were eager to replace it. I was naive, I know, but I thought being her patient she knew all personal data from this guy, so it seemed unlikely he would target her for a scam. His father was a known businessman, now retired and approaching his 80s. Mr. Lowy Sr. was well respected in his community and would not have let his son wreak havoc. Also, my wife had acquaintances in common with Benny's brother, a known doctor of another hospital. Christmas was approaching. She asked Benny, who had already been discharged and back home, for advice regarding the present she wanted to give me. Which was a phone. He hooked her up with the best she could think of. Now, I cannot remember the exact model, but it was the Sony Ericsson flagship and it was not yet offered by local carriers. He had access to it because of his status as a local representative for said brand. She went with it and paid. The job position I've set my employer was shutting down, so just for the sake of it, she asked Benny if he knew of someone needing an IT guy. Of course, he said. I will meet your husband at this place tomorrow. And there I was in a gas station uptown and he pulled over in a luxury car. Mr. Lowy was a normal-looking guy, used a cane and had a noticeable knee or hip pain. We sat down in the gas station coffee shop and he told me about a mid-management position reporting to him in a mining company I had barely heard about. He coached me on what I should say in the upcoming job interview. We spoke about salary. I was dazzled. Wait, mining? Didn't you say he was into imports? He was that kind of guy you cannot pause to question, because he had already thrown something extra to the mix and this position had a better paycheck than the one I was being laid off. In the next days we had a few phone calls, stuff looked promising. I had already been laid off. We agreed he would pick me up on December 24th and he would introduce me to senior managers as the recommended help desk junior manager. So I woke up extra early, put on my best suit and waited in the front yard. Hours went by. I had planned to be back before noon to arrange stuff for that night's dinner because my parents were coming over. After calling him repeatedly, he told me he had been assaulted and robbed. They took my cane and broke it on my knee, he wailed. Poor guy, I told him to forget about my interview for the time being. No, I promised you, I will make it up to you. Of course, since he had been injured, he was not able to deliver the items my wife bought from him. That night my mother asked me about the new job. I could not bring myself to tell her about the delay. I told her it was going fine. That night I googled him. Nothing showed up except for some awards in the Imports and Customs Associations of whatever. He called me to reschedule our interview. December 31st, again, picture me in my best suit outside my house on a summer morning. Of course, he did not show up. When I finally reach him, he tells me when his car had been stolen last week, they took his wallet too, which these thugs eventually dropped during another robbery, so now he had been detained as a suspect for that. He had not been able to pick the imported electronics on the customs office, so they had them moved to another custody unit where it would take a couple of weeks to retrieve. That night we went to my parents for New Year's Eve and my mother asked me for the new job. It's all fine, I said. I Google him again, this time with variations regarding his name or the supposed company he was setting me into. Not much showed up, nothing shady. The next call was like a week later. He told me that because he was being involved in a police investigation, this mining company had fired him. But this was actually good because now I was going to be interviewed to take his position as IT manager. This meant double my former paycheck and securing a position that would be a leap forward in my career, so I don't ask many questions, I was just grateful. All those delays in the end would pay off. This situation, as you have already figured out, went on and on for weeks. My interview never happened, the electronics never arrived. We had lost our money, our time, our Christmas, our hopes, and I was still unemployed and had not been applying for job offers since I had this one allegedly secured. I texted him somewhere in between. I texted him, "Why are you doing this to us?" He texted back, "If I wanted to, you have nothing on me." But if you stick with me, you will be rewarded tenfold. Cue in, the detective time went by. Eventually, my wife overhears from a coworker about this patient in another hospital she was working at. Some nurses do work part-time at other hospitals. She had fell for it too, but her husband was a detective, so a few hours later, we were filling him in the details of the scam we fell for. Asking around, he found a third nurse scammed by this guy. Soon enough, he was detained, this time for real, and admitted to have been scamming people due to an impromptu invented mild dementia. This detective talks him into an off-court deal in which he gave us back every cent, but not my time nor hopes, in exchange for us not pursuing any legal action. This was a decent deal because us, having failed to make a written agreement on any of these purchases, had at most a weak claim to our money. By the way, the money with which he paid us he had to borrow from this father and some from his brother, the doctor. Remember, this did not happen in the US. This agreement is actually completely legal down here, so I made a block. This part I rewrote to clarify events and consequences on our legal system. I could not go for any further legal action, but there was not a non-disclosure agreement whatsoever. And then I thought, what could prevent other people falling into this scammer's lies? Well, perhaps some Google results. I was in a unique position to tell my story without risking a legal backlash, so I created a blog on WordPress.com, think something like BennyLowy-the-Scammer.wordpress.com. It was a single post in third person telling my story. The site's admin, me of course, closing words were, "Has it happened to you?" In the following days, that post's comments had a dozen stories much like mine. For each comment that deserved to be a story of its own, with due permission from its author, I turned those to a post with a brief intro. A testimony from Javiera from X City. Each one eventually had comments and so on. Since civil action court filings as opposed to criminal courts are public in my country, you can dig into ongoing class actions and recent settlements. I found out 7 years later that he tried suing the contact for WordPress.nml, our local fictional TLD, on the grounds of undermining existing past and potential activity for the plaintiff. I would say that part is true. To this day, if you Google for Benny Lowy, that blog will be the first result. And it has been for the last 15 years. The case of course was dropped, but he took it to appeals and then to Supreme Court. There is another entry filed under a different local court, promptly dismissed, and whose expedient closes with his lawyer apologizing to Automatic.com for any past or future inconveniences related to this case, and whose verdict rules Benny Lowy had to pay also for the sued party attorney's fees. There is a third suit. It was filed by his former lawyer, to whom he had not paid for the former civil actions. I was tempted then and there to set a post on this blog saying, if I wanted to, you have nothing on me. However, I have never attempted to let him know who is doing this, and you know, I feel sorry for him, but every time I consider taking the blog down, I log in again. Today I did after 4 years, and see, he is still doing it. Those comments I turned into posts, of course, even knowing that I'm legally covered. The fact that I have not ever been contacted tells me he has done this to so many people we would not know where to start. All of his victims or scam targets are people in a vulnerable moment of their life or a rough patch. Unemployed guys, small startups looking for an angel investor, small branch salespeople pursuing a promising commission. Those who have time in time reached a compensation or agreement, it is because Benny's now ancient father had to chip in. From what they say, this brother has gone no contact, but it is still the one they go to before suing. Most of the commenters leave their email addresses, and I have known of a few that have teamed up with each other and succeeded in legal actions, but even if they hadn't, they still have a place to rant, and their rants are still the first result in Google if you look for him. Perhaps this is not a revenge, but it is my story. And yeah guys, let me know what you think about this story in the comments. I gotta say, I hoped for a little more of a revenge story, but it was still an interesting read. Thank you very much for listening. I hope to see you again tomorrow.